And I was inspired to write this book because I felt as if Chicagoans, like, we already don't get our due, but especially Black Chicagoans, right? Like, we have contributed so much culturally to the world, and we don't always get that respect for it, you know? And so I wanted this to really be a celebration of all those things and to kind of show people some of these connections. And I feel like the more you learn, the happier you are, the more pride you have in your city and where you're from. And so that really just kind of inspired me. It inspired me while I was working on it. The more I worked on it, the happier I was, the kind of puffed out my chest a little bit more every time I learned a new thing. And so I think it's just important for us to know.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining our Vibrant Learning Facebook Live event. My name is Lauren Smith, and I am one of the program coordinators at Sage Collective. I have loved participating in the Vibrant Learning program since I started working at the organization last year, and I'm excited to present our first virtual presentation of the new year with the launch of the Sage Advice Book Club. And I want to make sure that I mention we'll be giving away 5 autographed copies of Arionne's book, We Are the Culture, Black Chicago's Influence on Everything, in a drawing later this evening during this Facebook Live. Our esteemed guest, Arionne Nettles, who you just heard speak a little while ago, is a Chicago native and professional storyteller, journalist, business writer, and content marketer specializing in helping people and businesses share their stories. She's also the author of We Are the Culture, the book that we'll be discussing this evening. Arionne is both a FAMU alumna and currently serves as Garth C. Reeves Eminent Scholar Chair and instructor for digital journalism at Clark Atlanta University. Today, she's here to discuss with us the impact of culture and the fundamental art of storytelling, and for our Chicago audience, how Chicago's unique culture has influenced trends and shaped lives for many years. I'm also excited to introduce Donna Gaines, president of Sage Collective, and also a native Chicagoan who will moderate today's discussion. Donna, I'll send it over to you.
Thank you, Lauren. Hi, everyone. And Lauren, thank you so much for all that you've done to help Sage Collective as we have expanded our virtual programming. Lauren has been responsible for coordinating a lot of our virtual programming. And as many of you know, Sage Advice Vibrant Learning was set up so that we could provide on-site and virtual training and learning opportunities to older adults. And with our program expansion in 2025, we will be having art classes and toning and stretching classes that are going to be hosted by a former ballerina. We'll be giving you the latest on technology. We're launching our caregiver support program. But of course, we're going to have a lot of conversations like this on topics that are important to you. And so with that, Arionne, welcome. And it's such a pleasure to have you here this evening.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored to be here.
Well, like you, I am a native Chicagoan, although I'm currently residing in another state, and it has been a little bit of a culture shock for me. But I'm really excited to talk about Chicago, talk about your book, and talk about storytelling. And I tell you, you're an award-winning writer. You are an amazing storyteller. And as I was looking at your book, I have to say, as you were weaving all these different narratives together, and you talked about when you were growing up, it immediately made me think about my childhood. And I pictured myself in my neighborhood, riding my bike at the speed of light and singing at the top of my lungs. And, you know, so many things that you said just resonated with me and was so relatable. But I also have to say that I learned how to go down the Soul Train line. Talking about impact, right? And for many of you, you may know that Soul Train actually started in Chicago. So let me just ask this, because I know out there in Facebook land, I'm not the only person that learned how to come down the Soul Train line from looking at Soul Train. So if you have done the Soul Train line or you want to know how to do it, I want you to give us a thumbs up or comment But aside from those wonderful memories of coming up, I also thought about the impact that culture had on my life and some of the choices I made, the decision to become an entrepreneur. But that could not happen, of course, without kind of following in the footsteps of so many luminaries and people in Chicago that you speak about in your book. So, my question to you is, how has Chicago's culture informed or influenced your perspective on culture and some of the choices you've made, even in your personal or professional life?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think that growing up, I didn't really realize how lucky and how unique it was to grow up in Chicago culturally. Like, I didn't realize that that was not something that everyone had access to. Like, having the Art Institute down the street and the Museum of Science and Industry down the street, and then being able to be in oratory contests and, you know, having like famous poets visiting your elementary school and, just walking the streets that all of this culture has developed and been created. I thought that everybody had that. And now, I'm actually on campus now at Florida A&M, where I went to school. And being back in Tallahassee, I love it. I love my students. I love this campus. I love this school so much. But being in Tallahassee has been a big adjustment because the cultural scene and the number of museums and things to do it just doesn't compare to Chicago. So I thought that that was normal, but I'm glad that I thought that was normal because it felt as if we were all poets, for example, right? Like, it was like, yeah, you write poetry. Like, everybody writes poetry. Everybody writes short stories. Everybody tries to sing. Like, I was in like all city choir at one point. I've tried like all different types of art. I tried to paint, like, you just try all these things and they all feel attainable. And I think that that is just such an important thing to have growing up, like feeling kind of like you can do anything. And I think that that's what Chicago kids get. You feel like you can do any of these things. Everything is at your fingertips. It's nothing to be able to do and try these things. And so I think that that has probably followed me into adulthood, where things are hard. So I don't want to say that they're not hard, but things don't necessarily feel impossible. When people are like, how could you do X, Y, Z? I'm like, well, if I want to do a thing, I'll do a thing. I'll make it happen.
I so agree with you because as I even think about, for example, because I'm in the business space, right? And
Mm-hmm.
minority business was something I did and consulted in for a number of years. But I think about people like George Johnson, who
Yes.
started a publishing company, and um, even in Chicago now, when I think about the number of African American businessmen and African American millionaires and people like
Mm-hmm.
that, it really laid a foundation for me and made it seem, as you said, very achievable. And I feel like I really stood on the shoulders, and you hear that a lot. But had it not been for some of the people, some of these people that we admire and we've read about and we see on TV and we followed in sports, a lot of the things that we try, I agree, would not be seeming to be quite as attainable. So let me ask you, what role then can we play as individuals, or do you feel that our community even plays in helping to shape our culture, especially today? Because coming up, we went to church and we learned a lot from just hanging out in the neighborhood, right? We'd be on the corner, we'd be playing double dutch, we
Yeah.
up with our friends, but now we seem to be a little more fragmented. As I even think about the
Mm-hmm.
impact of social media and whether or not that's really shaping how we tell stories now in this soundbite world.
Mm-hmm.
But what role do you feel that individuals or even communities play in shaping culture?
Yeah. So I think, or at least I know that one thing I've like really tasked myself with is being a lot more intentional with supporting those smaller organizations, because we don't necessarily have the big, huge, influential organizations that we once had, where it was just really easy to know what to do. So, for example, if we're talking about the Black press, just using that as an example, and we're like, I want to support a Black publication in Chicago, or I want to support a local publication, period, right? You had a couple and you would like, I want to support the Chicago Defender, right? It is at that time, it was a massive behemoth of a publication, right? And now we got to work a little bit harder to find some more of the smaller ones, right? And so it might be, okay, well, I'm going to subscribe to the Tribe, which is a small Black millennial ran publication. And I'm going to subscribe to Block Club Chicago, which is a small neighborhood ran publication that was kind of, it's a nonprofit, and it was created after a billionaire like shut down DNA Info, right? So just being more intentional about finding those smaller things. Maybe, you know, having a membership to the MCA is great, but also maybe there's a local gallery near in your neighborhood, or within 15-20 minutes of you, that might be a really great way, and you can spend $15 a year or something, and that $15 a year membership is really impactful for that local gallery. So just, I think that we have more like smaller things that we should and need to support, and it's harder, but it doesn't just necessarily like drop in our laps. And so I know for me, I've had to be like, okay, well, you talk a good game. Where you gonna put your money where your mouth is? You're gonna put your efforts where your mouth is, right? Like, am I gonna show up to these things? Am I gonna show up to, I want to do the Broadway on Chicago shows. Are you gonna show up to the local theater? Are you gonna show up to these places and support stuff? And a lot of these newer, smaller things are ran by younger people, and we always say we want to support the next generation of people. We want to make sure that they have the support and the longevity to keep stuff going. So trying to find who's up next and making sure that we are supporting them with whatever resources we can share with them as well. So I think the landscapes of things are just like changing, and you know, hit it the nail right on the head when you said things feel fragmented. And so that can feel frustrating. And so I don't think that we all can support everything. Like, it's probably impossible, but like, if let's say it's your thing that you know about, like I know about media because I'm a journalist, so I should be able to find local organizations across the country that I should be spending my money on to support. But there might be some things that I don't necessarily know about. Like, I'm not necessarily into entrepreneurship in that way. So I may not know like what funds to support in that way, right? You know, so whatever it is that I know, I should try to support the things that I know and that I can help grow.
Well, that's a good point. Let me juxtapose what you just said and think about it in terms of the work that you're doing now at FAMU, for example. Do you feel that there are activities or things that you can do with those students to help shape them to build the kind of culture that you experienced in Chicago? Because as you admit, or as you stated, it's very rare. And let me just, as an aside, I was looking at a video by Kev on Stage, and he has this new series out, Churchy or something like that. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So they're filming the next season, and one of the actresses is from Chicago, and he was joking, and he was asking her if she could drive the pretend car and back up and talk, and she said, "I'm from Chicago. I can do anything." And it just reminds me of what you said. Anything anybody says from me, I'm like, I'm from Southside Chicago.
Yes, exactly.
Right? So can you engender that, you think, that feeling, or how can you work with the students there even to create that kind of awareness about culture and how it can impact and shape their lives?
Yeah, I love that so much. So I think one good thing about my students as a whole is that they have really great confidence. And so I'm always like, listen, y'all are brilliant. You are brilliant and amazing. And my job is to make sure that you have the hard skills to back it up when you walk into wherever you're going. Like right now, like I'm teaching a lot of writing classes. And so especially if I'm teaching a higher level writing classes, I'm like, okay, I am going to tell you the things that people are going to judge you by. Like, I know you're brilliant. I know you're brilliant, but somebody's going to read your cover letter. And if that period is in the wrong place, they're going to make a judgment about how brilliant you are. And I don't want that. Not on my watch. So let's talk about those things. But like, even then, you know, being like, okay, how can I, it's easy then, even still, it's easy for me to be like, because like a lot of my students don't want to be traditional reporters. They don't really want to go into a newsroom. So,
Well, what does that look like?
yeah,
What does that look like?
exactly, right? So I asked them, well, what do you want to do? And so even then, it is, well, how do I support them in what they want and not what I want for them, I guess, you know? It's like, okay, well, you still need this degree. You still need to get out of the school. Let's talk about how you can still graduate, you can still do great, you'll still get these skills, and these skills will still be transferable, and you can still use
Yeah.
them in the thing that you want to do, you know. um so I think sometimes like supporting them is also like supporting their change and like the things that they want to do that might be different than how we've done it. And I remember when I would be in school and I would be thinking like, I mean, my professors just don't understand us because we want to do stuff different,
Yeah.
you know.
Right.
And so it's kind of like every group they're gonna want to do stuff differently, right? And so trying to maybe even phrase, if I'm teaching you, I need to phrase and frame what I'm teaching you in a way that makes sense for you, because I don't want you to just like zone out. So I'm like, okay, in this thing that you want to do, which sounds fantastic if that's what you want to do, these are how these skills can help you. And so I think just still being supportive without trying to
Yes.
like crush their dreams. Because you know how you'll hear about somebody successful and they'll be like, yeah, I had that one professor who said I'd never be able to do XYZ. And look at me now. You know, I never
Yes.
want that story. I never want that to be me.
I think we've all had that teacher or
Mm-hmm.
professor at some point in our lives. And, I don't want to stereotype because that's ageism in reverse, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know whether these are Gen Zs, Ys, or whatever, but
Uh-huh.
what I
Uh-huh.
have observed
Yeah.
is that
Yeah.
a lot of younger people, to your point, really just want us to kind of get out of the way, like share your knowledge, and then let us take that knowledge and do
Mm-hmm.
what we will with it. And when you talk about the absence, for example, of these big organizations that
Mm-hmm.
used to lead us and be the spokespeople for spokes, person for our
Mm-hmm.
people, I think about Black Lives Matter and
Mm-hmm.
juxtaposing that against the civil rights movement as an
Mm-hmm.
example, because there used to be the head, the Jesse Jackson, the
Mm-hmm.
Andrew Young, who I saw today at Jimmy Carter's funeral,
Oh wow.
and the people who led the movement. And think about, they were in their 30s.
Yeah.
These men, Martin Luther King was in his
Yeah.
30s when he was having a dream.
Mm-hmm.
So we really have to make room, to your point, and make space for younger people to really have a voice and to listen to them and recognize that they're really going to do things a lot differently. So I want to kind of double back to the conversation, or we kind of touched on social media,
Mm-hmm.
because as we think about storytelling and certainly preserving our culture, sharing our culture,
Mm-hmm.
it has a lot to do with sharing our stories and passing them down, right? Social media gives you, like, I think, is it TikTok that gives you 40 characters?
T- Um, well, Twitter used to give you at one point 140 characters. So people
Okay.
used to say a lot like, oh, you can only do so much with 140 characters. That used to be like a common phrase. Yeah.
Okay. So, with that though, when I think about telling a story, I'm getting ready to pull up, get some hot chocolate, sit at someone's feet, and
Mhm.
really hear a story. Back in the day when my father was a sharecropper, and then we're
Mhm.
going to bring it all the way back, right? Um, is there space for storytelling? Or maybe even a better question would be, how do you feel that storytelling and preserving our culture has been impacted by, this um, social media climate that we're in, and where things go, you know, like virtual and all of that. What's the word? Viral in a
Gotcha.
heartbeat.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So even during that time, right? when we only had 140 characters, people would do long threads that could captivate people. You know, there was literally a movie that was made from a Twitter thread that a girl made. Um, and so if you're a good storyteller, it could be a place to capture an audience, grow your following. I don't necessarily see social media as a place for that to be the end of your story, though. But I think it could be a good place, and often is a good place for interaction with people, for engagement with other people, um, and for news gathering and information gathering, I would say. So, like, if you really want to know what people are interested in, really being active on social media in an organic way, helps you to do that. So, telling stories naturally helps you see what are people into, what are they not into, what are they interested in. But all of these platforms are fleeting. They could be here today and here tomorrow, so they aren't like permanent places. Or, I know you mentioned like, Black Lives Matter in a different setting, but like that is a really good example of how Twitter was used in those early days of Black Lives Matter, especially as an important tool for sharing what was happening. So people would be out in the streets, taking photos, video, sharing what was happening as it was happening.
Real time, exactly.
It was a way to connect. And so that stuff doesn't have to stay on Twitter, but it's a way to see what's happening. And so I think it's just like a really important way to connect.
Yes.
And, if I'm in Chicago and I see what's happening in Ferguson, that was my only way to know,
Yes.
And so I think that in that way, it can be really helpful. But yeah, I mean, I do agree that it shouldn't just stay there. That shouldn't be where you just want to giving all your information to these billionaires and you're not getting anything back. You just tell the stories on social media and it just stay there. But it's kind of like, I think a lot of people have found benefit in just doing like these kind of micro storytelling, like, just telling a little bit, engaging with people, or sharing small clips of things they do other places. And that helps them grow and like grow their following. Like if, let's say you're a journalist and you are on TV, if you share small clips from being on TV, people who never watch TV will still follow you. And news stations see that and they like people with big followings, so just it can help you in other areas. So I do understand the importance of sharing and doing storytelling on social media, because especially I think for our generation, like when I graduated from college, it was during the Great Recession and we were all fighting for jobs. It was really hard to get hired. And so everybody needed to stand out. So it's like whatever you could do to stand out would be helpful. Yeah.
Well, I really feel that as an author, you really are helping to shape the cultural conversation, and storytelling, as we've talked about, is such a powerful way of preserving our culture. And at Sage, we're really intentional about finding opportunities to hear the stories of the older adults in the program. Like at Chicago Commons, we have a couple of individuals who actually attended the memorial service of Emmett Till. And we have another lady who taught the Tuskegee Airmen how to swim, and he and his wife. And if we don't share those stories, if we don't save those stories, if we don't pass them down, then we've lost them forever, right? So I was wondering if you would just take a moment to share a little bit about your journey as a storyteller and kind of what inspired you to become an author. Because I heard you talk a lot about things that impacted you culturally as you were growing up. But I don't know that I really heard how the leap from educator or journalist to writer came about. Perhaps you studied journalism in school, and so you always wanted to be a writer. But tell us about the storytelling part of being an author, because there are a lot of authors, they don't always weave these stories together the way that you did.
Yeah, so I think I never thought I would be an author, especially not an author of nonfiction. Um, I am a really big fiction reader. I love history and I like reporting history stories. So that has always been like some of my favorite types of stories have been history stories. But as far as like writing, I never imagined that I would write this. But when I first got into the academy, people would kind of say, well, what are you going to write? You know, so it was kind of this pressure to say, either you're going to get a PhD or you're going to write a book. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm probably going to do both, but let's figure out what I'm going to write, you know? And I'm like, I'm a writer. I'm a journalist. I can write a book. And I was like, oh, it'll be easy. I'll just write, if I write a book, if I do however many chapters, that's like writing however many articles. I can do that. You know, it was not that easy. It was not easy at all. But that was my thought process. It was like, oh, that'll be the easiest thing to do. And I wanted to do arts and culture because that was some of the reporting I had done and had loved. And I really wanted it to be, you know, I said, well, if I'm going to do my first book, it should be something that I'm really familiar with and that I'm actually knowledgeable about. I didn't want it to necessarily be me diving into something that was totally new. And I'm diving into writing for the first time as well. So I wanted to at least be writing about something that I'm a bit familiar with. And so I decided to kind of find a way to expand some of the reporting that I had been doing, just kind of spread out and find like what was the kind of through line and the thread that connected a lot of that work, and could I just expand on it. um, and then the book just ended up being a lot bigger and a lot deeper than I thought, and I also didn't necessarily expect to put a lot of me in there, but then that happened too. So
Glad you did. In fact, I have to say that your book is a walk down memory lane for anyone who had a childhood, any childhood memories. And because I grew up in Chicago, it's filled with all these rich narratives and juicy tidbits. And I'm going to have to just stop and read just a little passage because this really grabbed me. So, first of all, let me say to your point, you have things about music and sports and the arts and opera and black luxury and black hair and black representation on the screens. But what I went to, of course, is First Taste of Beauty. So, first of all, it says, written while listening to Have You Seen Her by the Shy Lights. Stop. So, first of all, you've already put me in the mood, right? Because I immediately started singing, Have You Seen Her? I mean, it just immediately clicked in, right? But then it goes on to say, there is a certain art to dressing as a Black woman. Sometimes it's big, winter furs, bright colors, shiny things, and sometimes it's subtle. A new pair of shoes, a well made bag, a carefully applied dab of your signature lipstick color. Well, this is the lead in to Fashion Fair and talking about Eunice Johnson, who was the wife of George Johnson. And then you go on to talk about Desiree Rogers and McKissick. I can't think of her name right. Cheryl McKissick, and how they took over the ownership. But it was just so interesting to me because, yeah, when you talk about Black beauty, the furs, the bags, the colors, and everything that just so reflects who we are, right? And so from the beginning, I'm listening to the music in my head and I'm just reading. And I'm telling you, these stories really drew me in. And so the little pieces of you in there, so relatable. I think not just because I'm a Black woman from Chicago, but like I say, if you had any kind of childhood and remember riding your bike or going to the corner store for candy or whatever you
yeah.
used to do, it's in the book, right? So let me ask you, because this is really a story within a story within a story, so many stories, right? Why did you use that approach for We Are the Culture? And why do you think this resonates so much with readers on such a deep cultural level?
So, well, first of all, thank you so much for that. And I really intentionally wanted to think about the stories that were very relatable because I wanted people to feel connected to the content that then comes after the essay. I didn't want it to be like, and I guess because it's not a memoir, you know, when you write a memoir, you want to tell people about this remarkable, special life you had. And I didn't want to write a memoir. I have no desire to ever write a memoir. And so I wanted to talk about the experiences that I had that feel very Chicago and that feel relatable, that when you read, you're like, you know what? I had a candy lady on my block. I know what it's like to either you had that fur, or you remember your grandma putting on that fur on the special occasion in a cold winter day, dressing up for New Year's Eve or something. Like you literally go to a funeral in Chicago in the winter and all the ladies got on their furs, right? Like it is
The
a
thing.
thing. It is and so it's just these very specific things that like my Florida homegirls just don't know about it, right? And it's not bad, but I want them
Right.
to imagine it. I want them to picture it. I wanted to think about those common things that connect us. And because, as like Black Americans, there is this thought sometimes that we don't have culture. And it's like we have cultural traditions. And those cultural traditions vary per region, per city, per area, right? The same way they do in any country, in any area.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to celebrate those cultural traditions, right? And so I think how we dress, how we hang out, how we love on each other, how we celebrate each other, like all of those are things that are our cultural traditions. And so I just wanted to like make them feel like, pointed out, like, yes, that's a tradition that we have.
Yes. Almost like sweet potato pie at Thanksgiving.
Yes, yes, right. Like, yes, that is a tradition for a reason.
Well, that's actually one of the reasons why we wanted to make sure that we had copies of your book so that we could give it away to some of the people in our audience who joined us today. And if I could say this without sounding like a game show host, we're going to give them away to only 5 lucky members of our audience. But speaking of our audience, I want to take a minute to just look at some of our comments, if you don't mind. Well, Kathy Gonzalez says, these peeps are wonderful. Love that. And then everyone is saying hello. Monique says, people who are from Chicago attribute everything to being from Chicago. We have superpowers. And then Dana says, oh, this is an interesting comment. She says, it's interesting to see how our individual lives influence the culture of a whole community. Funny how we don't sometimes realize it, but we're really laying the groundwork for someone coming up behind us who may not even know, that we're impacting their lives that way. Yeah. I love that, Dana. And then Dania says, literally just ran into the candy lady the other day after years of moving from the community. Isn't that special when you actually do see people from your past or that you remember from long ago, or you hear a song and it just puts you right back where you were? Awana Brown Hampton says, this is great information. Thank you. And Charlene Brown says, absolutely. Good stuff. Thank you, guys. And please continue to comment because in fact, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask Arionne, we want to make sure that we give you an opportunity to do that. So I'm going to talk about storytelling a little bit because you're a master storyteller, and I know that everyone has a story to tell. My mother wrote her memoir, and she didn't finish it. I'm going to finish it for her, but it was fascinating to hear some of the experiences she had as a little girl growing up. And I'll just say this. I remember her saying that when her grandmother passed, that they actually had her funeral in the house, in the living room. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that was traumatic or if that was a common experience, but it really opened my eyes. I think about the things that, as I said, even a few generations ago, people lived through an experience. So I'd like you to give some advice to some of our listeners or some of our viewers. because I know that writing about culture,
Yeah.
and your personal experiences can be very complex, can be deeply emotional, right? So, what is your process for translating some of your ideas into a compelling story? Can you just share maybe the steps that you take as part of
Yeah,
it?
yeah. So I would say the first thing is really being, I don't want to say aggressive in gathering information, but be have that be your a priority. So, you know, one of my like greatest regrets is not like interviewing my grandma before she passed away.
Yeah.
My granddad, he passed away when I was like really little, so I wouldn't have known to do that. But my grandma passed away when I was like maybe 23, 22, 23. So still younger, but like, I was old enough. And I think if I were
Mhm.
a journalist at that time, I was not. I would have maybe thought to like get her on tape, just asking her some questions, like just some basic stuff. So I had to, rely on my memory. And also I had to rely on the memory of her oldest daughter, who luckily kind of likes to be kind of our family historian. So that was just lucky for me, is that she, was a wealth of knowledge, and she doesn't mind sitting down with me a bunch of times, answering my follow-up questions like, hey, I remember you said this. Now, was this year or this year? Now, was it before this or after this?
Yeah.
But really prioritizing getting the information, because one thing that you do learn in journalism school is that a lot of times you struggle writing because you don't have enough information yet.
Mm.
So, a lot of times my students are like, I'm struggling to write. And I'm like, you haven't done enough reporting, right? So if you are doing a story that needs some information from other people, you don't even need fancy equipment. You could use your phone. All smartphones have a notes recording. You can
Mhm.
use that. There are free apps. Like there's this app called Otter that will transcribe stuff for you. And there's an app that'll do that. Or you can even upload your voice notes straight into Otter. So, or you can record into Otter, or you can use your voice notes. Either ways, but there's tools that'll help you. And it's not the best transcription, but you don't need the best transcription. You just need it good enough so that, you can kind of scan and find the words you need, right? And then the next thing I would say is, if you have an idea, to try to outline. I know a lot of us don't like to outline. It makes us feel like we're in school. But it is a lot easier to kind of have an outline and have sections, and then you're plugging and playing, right? So then if I have an outline, I can say, well, okay, I know I want to talk about my grandparents' store. Okay, I want to talk about their record label. I want to talk about their whatever. What did my aunt say about that? Oh, there's a quote that I can put in here. There's this that I have in here, right? So you're kind of like filling in these gaps. You can hop around, you can skip around, you're just kind of filling it in. And for me, that really helps me. And then after that, it's just writing through, like getting it down. It's gonna be bad. That's what everybody tells you. That first draft is bad, but it's okay. Just getting it on the paper. You can edit it later. And then I guess my last piece of advice was to just maybe set a routine. If you have a really big writing project, if you're doing like kind of random writing, you don't need it. But like when I was writing this draft, I had to get it together. And so I would put my son to bed at 9 o'clock. And my office was in my basement. I would go into my basement. I had like an oil diffuser where you can put like the oil and the steam comes up. So I would use like lavender and eucalyptus, and I would make my favorite drink. And then
Nice.
so I would kind of like make it feel like a treat. Like, I
Mhm.
know this is something you don't feel like doing, but this is going to be a treat. This is going to feel good. This is going to be something that is for you, and you're doing something that is important. And then once you kind of get on a roll, like let that fuel you, So as the more I wrote, the more I started to feel like this is what I'm supposed to be working on, you know? And so it is tough. And so I think that writing is just hard. It's always going to be hard. I am a writer and it's still hard. Journalists joke all the time where they're like, oh, that's the worst part. It's like actually writing all the stuff I said I was going to do. And it's just, you know, it's just tough. It's just getting it on the paper. But after you've gotten it on the paper, even if it's a draft, even if it's not a good draft, what you got on the paper, that feeling feels so good.
And I imagine, you know, I have to write every day. I'm writing emails, and sometimes it's just and this is really an overuse of the word writer's block, because it's hardly like I'm an author or anything, but I can imagine how it'd be difficult sometimes to feel inspired or to keep going. And then when you get to the process of where now you're ready to publish it, well, I'm going to talk about publishing because so many people say, you know, I'm going to self-publish, or I've heard that, you know, taking your book to a publishing company is not always the way to go because they don't want unsolicited manuscripts. And then people talk about ebooks and all these new methods of kind of getting your story or your book out to the public. What is the best way to do that? What do you think about self-publishing or ebooks as a methodology?
So, what I would say, I mean, I guess it definitely depends on the person. So, I'll say for me, I am not a self published person. And I have a few reasons why. The first is that I am used to working in situations where I have edits and a lot of edits and editors. So I really appreciate the significant feedback that I get from editors.
Okay.
And so I like that an editor is gonna be like, this is boring over here. This is confusing right here. This is not like you gotta rewrite this, right? It does mean that it takes a really long time for your book to come out. So the edit, just from writing the draft to writing, I wrote the draft and then I wrote two more. I went through like 2 rounds of pretty significant edits before copy edits. So it took about 2 years to just writing the book. So it takes a long time. But because of that, I feel a lot more confident in the final body of work. I don't feel as if it was rushed. I feel as if it did get better with each round of edits. And so it could be different if I were writing a different type of book, for example, like maybe if I were writing a more of a manual or more of a technical book, especially, maybe I wouldn't, feel that way. Like, I actually have a new book. I mean, I have a new book coming out technically, but it's a For Dummies book. And so it was really a manual. So it wasn't that many rounds of edits. It was just really 1 round to edit and then they published it. So it wasn't that much. So, it's more of a manual. And for something like that, you can hire a good editor if you want to self-publish. But then finding a good editor, right? But there are good editors that help people self-publish. So I think that's hard. I will also say, and this is from my point of view again, that the support of having a publisher, making sure my book is in the right place is also helpful. Making sure that it's in the right bookstores. Like, I am an author and I got a full-time job as a professor, and I also freelance, and I also am a mom of a special needs son, and I have a lot of jobs, right? Like if I add them all up. And so I don't want to be hustling and going to the bookstore down the street to say, hey, can you please carry my book? Like I don't want to do all that. And so they gonna do it. So they did it. They made sure all the books in Chicago carried the book. And so it does mean that, they take a big chunk. And so I think that is just the thing. But I still say that because some people, right? Like if, let's say I've had friends who've had such a big following And they might come out with books where, like, let's say if it's like a workbook, where it's not as much text, it's more like designed well, and it's kind of like, their kind of thoughts through that. And they have self-published, no regrets. And so I think that it just really depends. And also, you can still have an ebook whether you self-publish or use a publisher. So your publisher can also do an ebook version, as well as if you self-publish using something like Amazon self-publishing, they'll also give you that option to do both the ebook and a printed version. So you can do that either way.
That's really helpful information. And I think what I'm also hearing is that you have to not have thin skin and
Yeah.
you have to be open to collaboration, because
Yeah.
maybe I've been looking at too many movies, but I always hear about someone who's written a book or written a screenplay and they take it and then they change the character's name and they change everything about it. And there's a lot of pride of authorship, right? Because you poured your
Yes.
heart
Yes.
and soul into this and this is
Mhm,
your
mhm.
baby. And now
So
someone is
yeah,
telling your baby's not that
yeah.
cute. That doesn't
Well,
feel good.
I will say, I did intentionally look at small publishers, because I was like, oh, if I do a small publisher, they'll probably care more about it. And then this was like Chicago Review Press. So I was like, they're small and they're local. And this is a book about Chicago. So I did think about, like, would this book be mutually beneficial for me and them? So thinking about that, versus, like, trying to it, do like a super big press. And so, like, I would also say that if a person is going to use a publisher, see what other books have been published, and that will give you a good idea of who, like maybe what your book could look like, right? Like how could it come out? And if you love the books that they have published, then I bet you'd love what that, like their edits
Yeah.
and their collaboration will probably be good. So that's how I would think about it.
About that. I want to make sure we leave a little time for a couple of questions. And of course, we have to do our book giveaway. That's
Yes,
coming up in a couple
yes.
of minutes. So I'm going to start to close out now because I know that we have a couple of questions. Mike Brown very quickly said, is it true that everyone has at least one book in them?
I don't know, because I think that some people really hate writing, but they have ideas. And I think that they have good thoughts. And I think that it is okay. I think that everything doesn't have to be a book, even if you have that book in you, maybe, if that makes sense. Like, it could be that maybe that ends up being a podcast, maybe it's a video series, maybe it's something different. I think that I know that, like, everybody feels like they have to do it, like that books should be like, because sometimes there's a level of prestige, right? Most of us, I don't know if Gen Z thinks that, but with our, at least us and above, we kind of feel like there's a little bit of that. But I think that everybody has a story in them. I do think that. But I think that how you tell that story can definitely be different. And I think that there's a value in oral storytelling, in video, right? Like, written is not the only way. And especially when we think about historically, so many of our different cultures have valued different ways of telling stories.
That was Mike's follow-up question. He said, aside from writing, what are some other ways that you can preserve or practice cultural
Yeah,
preservation?
yeah.
So that was right on point.
Oh, I
Yeah.
love that. One thing that I've been doing is just really taking in knowledge. So, like, 2 weeks ago, I was in New York, and I went to the Whitney and went to the Alvin Ailey exhibit. It was so lovely. And so for somebody, like, I take dance lessons. And so all the times we were taking dance lessons, my teacher will be like, oh, he used to dance with Alvin Ailey, and he'll be like, oh, this is what Mr. Ailey would think, or this is so-and-so, or this is, this technique. And so being able to see that, and there was like letters to Alvin Ailey from Langston Hughes, and there was just like so much culture in that room that I felt like just being there, I was absorbing. I was like, even if I don't remember everything I see, I'm gonna get it. And so I think, like, being in those spaces, taking people who maybe wouldn't be in those spaces and like exposing them to it too is like a way to kind of help preserve some of these great things. Because especially when it comes to like museums and stuff like that, when we look back historically, a lot of our stuff wasn't preserved, it wasn't supported. And so as we continue to like really focus on preserving it, like, you know, they know when we pay money to go see that type of stuff at a place like the Whitney, they'll have more of it.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, final question, because I really, there's so many things I want to say. I guess I need a part two. I feel like we're kindred spirits, so I hope you won't be a stranger,
I'm
Arionne.
not a stranger. We're family now.
But with the success of We Are the Culture, what do you see as your next? I know you mentioned that you were kind of working on or thinking about your next project.
Mhm.
Is it too soon to give us a tease about what that's going to be about? Have you
So
fleshed it?
outside of the For Dummies book, which is just a For Dummies for journalism for dummies, it's just a but you know the For Dummies series are just like manuals, so
Yes.
that doesn't really count. I am working on a book about TV, and I'm hoping to start working on that for real soon. But it's not. I've done almost nothing, so I can't really. I
Okay.
can't
Well,
really.
I'm going to be looking, whatever it is, I can't wait. And let me know so I can pre order it. Monique asked the question: are
Mhm.
people reading and buying books as much as they used to? What do book sale numbers show?
Yeah, so I don't know if it is as much as they used to, but I think that there is now in like the last couple years, especially since COVID, a growing kind of cultural movement back towards books. I still don't think they've rebound. Like book numbers haven't rebound to like, you know, what we know them to be. But like there's more book clubs, especially with even younger people. Like, for example, I have some former students who are like 24 and we text each other about books all the time. And they're only 24, right? And so they will text me like, "Oh, did you read this? Oh my gosh, this is my next read," right? And so that is actually really common. Now, the types of books and what that's about, it might be different. There's a big push back into romance because there's so many more like there's more diversity in romance books. There's like for like bigger people, different like cultural identities of people in romance books. So like all of those things have like drawn a bigger draw to like romance books for Gen Z, for example. And people my age. Like I read probably way more romance than I thought I would have. Um, and my book sales are I am shocked. I just didn't think anybody would really care about my little old book. I was like, if I just, you know, sell a couple, that'll be fine. But like call and response books in Chicago and Hyde Park, I love them. They're really great. They just opened up last year. And she's like, your book is like our top selling book. And so I'm just floored that that is even possible. So people are buying book, but I think it's like, you know, in communities, right? There's a like a running book club I know in like there's just so many different things. So I think people are using books to build community, especially after COVID made us all be so separate. People now want to just intentionally find more ways to connect with each other, and books are a great way to do that.
Well, let me say that we are so excited that you were our inaugural author for the launch of our book club. We're going to be
Thank
highlighting the book.
you.
We so enjoyed this conversation. I'm going to turn this back over to Lauren. I want to thank our audience. I loved your comments, your questions. Samira says, I love the concept of the book, so much Chicago
Thank
pride and Black culture. Absolutely. And thank you for joining us. Back to you, Lauren, and thank you, Ariane, so
Thank you
much.
so much.
So,
Absolutely.
Lauren,
Thank you both. Thank
I
you.
want I want to be here for this drawing. I'm excited.
Me too. All right, guys. Now we're going to do our drawing for our book giveaway with 5 lucky viewers getting a signed autographed copy of We Are the Culture, Black Chicago's Influence on Everything. We have our handy dandy wheel of names. And as you all have
Well,
been coming in, we've been adding you to the list. So let's go get our first winner. Oh, this is so exciting.
it
Look
is
at
for
all
me
of the
too.
names. Thank you all so much for joining. Hey, Dino Smith is our first winner of the night. Woo! Oh, this is so exciting.
This is really cool. You know how I am about toys and games.
It makes it fun, and I'm keeping track of all the games for everyone. Next is Iris Connor.
Hey, Iris.
Yay! All right, 2 down, 3 to go. Next up, Charlene Brown, it looks like. Woo! We are just speeding through these winners.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Charlene's trying to get 2 books. Let's look at it there.
No repeats. We got to do that one more time.
Oh, Iris. Okay, let's try it again. I think the people who are getting their names twice should go and play the lottery today.
Yeah.
Alana.
Alana. Amazing.
And our last one.
Winner of the night. Ooh, that one was close. I'm so Elizabeth Mbanu. That's our 5 winners, guys. All right, just to recap, just so everybody knows, in case you missed it, Dino Smith, Iris Connor, Charlene Brown, Iwana Brown Hampton, and Elizabeth Mbanu. Congratulations! Congratulations to all of our winners. Please, after we have finished the live stream, go to the contact page on our website and provide us with your name and email address and put "We Are the Culture" in the comments, and we'll contact you for your shipping address. That was so fun. Yeah. Both the wheel and the conversation. So thank you again, Arionne. I know for me, I learned quite a bit today about publishing and about storytelling in general. And you really struck a chord with me specifically on the dance front, because I'm a theater girly. That's what I do. I'm not from Chicago. I'm going to make a visit. I'm going to get there. And I'll ask you both where to go, like where are the spots to be.
We got
But I know for me, I got into theater because the first ever show that I saw on Broadway and first big production was The Lion King. And it was the first time that I had seen Black storytellers and a group of performers telling a story that I didn't know quite yet. I was still very young. I was still very little. But as soon as that music started, I was in the aisle. And I'm telling you, like 5 years old, I got up, was in the aisles, dancing with the elephants and the giraffes, and just experiencing something I had never felt before, I'd never seen before. And I ended up going to school for it. And now I'm back in New York doing it all again. So it's a very unique experience and something that I have found valuable as a storyteller in its own way. So thank you for your conversation today and for everything that you've shared around storytelling, around writing, around your journey. And just thank you for joining us and being a part of this journey with us.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And to our audience, thank you all for joining us. We hope you took with you a few things from today's conversations. Perhaps it caused you to reflect on how culture has impacted your life and your life choices. Or maybe you have a deeper understanding of the importance of sharing your culture and story with your family and others. And of course, we sincerely hope we've inspired you to tell your story. As Donna mentioned, we have other exciting programming planned. And next up, just next week, for all you budding artists, join us on January 14th and the 21st for Art with Asha. You'll learn the basics of portrait drawing, and all you'll need to bring with you is a pencil and paper. And you can register on our website under Vibrant Learning, Workshops, and Events. And to learn more about Sage Collective and access more of our Vibrant Learning content, please visit our website at sagecollective.org. Like us on social media and check us out on our brand new YouTube channel. For now, remember to stay connected and keep learning. Good night, everyone. Thanks so much.